The sun burned hot over the capital city, throwing shimmering waves of heat against the glass towers and dusty pavements below. Traffic horns blared in chaotic rhythm, street vendors shouted their prices, and a mix of smells, spices, exhaust fumes, and roasted corn, filled the air. At the edge of Independence Avenue, where businessmen brushed shoulders with hawkers, an old man sat hunched over on a broken wooden stool. His beard was white, his clothes tattered, and his face carved with the lines of many years of hardship. His name was Musa. In front of him sat a small plastic cup, faded and cracked at the rim, but inside it lay folded bills, his lifeline. Every note represented struggle, a day of begging under the harsh sun, a kind stranger's pity, or a sympathetic passerby who couldn't bear to see the emptiness in his eyes. That morning, Musa had counted it carefully. $1,000. Enough, finally, for a deposit at the hospital. Enough to schedule the operation that might save his failing eyesight. He held the cup close, whispering a quiet prayer. Just then, the sound of heavy laughter rippled across the street. Heads turned. A group of young men in designer suits and sunglasses strolled down the avenue as if it belonged to them. At their center walked one whose presence turned every eye. Daniel, the only son of the president. His polished golden shoes reflected the sunlight with every step. The watches on his wrist glinted, his cologne trailed behind him, and the arrogance in his stride was undeniable. He carried himself like someone untouchable, someone who had never heard the word no. Vendors paused mid-sale. Taxi drivers muttered his name. Even police officers standing at the corner stiffened, unsure whether to salute or stay invisible. Daniel grinned. He liked the attention. He thrived on it. And then his gaze fell on Musa. Musa lifted his head when the shadow fell over him. His cloudy eyes blinked at the tall figure standing just a foot away. "Al-Haji, please, spare some kindness," Musa's voice rasped, fragile but hopeful. Daniel tilted his head, scanning Musa's frail frame, the shaking hands, the cracked lips. He chuckled softly. "Look at this," he said, nudging his friend. "The man even has savings." The others laughed. One of them pulled out his phone to record. Inside the cup, the bills seemed suddenly brighter under the sun, mocking Daniel with their wrinkled persistence. It wasn't much compared to the luxury he lived in, but something about it made him pause. "Tell me, old man," Daniel crouched down, resting his elbows on his knees. "What do you plan to do with all this?" "Buy a palace." Musa shook his head. "It's for my eyes, sir. Surgery. I want to see before I leave this world." The street grew quieter. Some passers-by slowed to listen, but no one dared interfere. Daniel tapped the rim of the cup with his finger. "Your eyes. And you think the world cares if you see or not?" Musa swallowed hard, clutching the cup as though it might disappear. "I care," he whispered. The words should have pierced Daniel, but instead they fueled his cruel curiosity. Daniel stood abruptly, towering over the beggar. His friends circled, their laughter sharp and echoing. "Watch this," Daniel said with a grin, his eyes gleaming with mischief. Musa's heart thudded. He pulled the cup closer to his chest, but Daniel's gaze was fixed, hungry. "Come on, Danny," one of his friends urged. "Do it. Show him how the real world works." "Yeah," another added. "Let the poor man know money doesn't belong to the street." Daniel smirked, adjusting his golden cufflinks. He looked down at Musa with a mocking glance. "You see, old man," he said, lowering his voice, "life is a game. And in this game, there are winners," he tapped his chest, "and losers." Musa shook his head desperately. "Sir, please. That is all I have." "Then maybe it's time you learned what it feels like to have nothing." And with one swift motion, Daniel's hand shot forward. Musa's gasp pierced the air as Daniel snatched the cup from his hands. The crumpled bills fluttered like wounded birds before settling back into the cup, now dangling arrogantly in Daniel's grasp. "Stop. Please." Musa's voice cracked, trembling with panic. "That's my surgery, my hope. Please." But Daniel only tossed the cup from one hand to the other, mocking its weight. "Look at this," he announced loudly, shaking the bills so the street could see. $1,000 in a beggar's cup. Imagine that. His friends erupted in laughter. "Take a picture," one shouted. This belongs in the news. President's son rescues a beggar from the burden of cash. The crowd around them grew, murmurs rising. Some people looked away, afraid. Others clenched their fists, but no one stepped forward. After all, who would dare confront the president's son? Musa fell to his knees, tears streaking his dusty cheeks. He reached out, grasping Daniel's shoes. "Please, my son. Please. Don't take it. It's all I have." Daniel kicked his hand away lightly, as though brushing off dirt. He leaned down and hissed, "Earn it like I did." His friends roared in approval, slapping his back as he turned to walk away, the cup still in his possession. For Musa, the world spun. His chest ached, his vision blurred further. He collapsed against the stool, his whispers lost in the noise. And then, a faint click. From the edge of the crowd, a young street vendor held his breath. His stall of roasted plantains smoked unattended as his trembling fingers clutched an old phone. He had recorded everything. Every laugh, every cruel word, every desperate plea. It was all captured in shaky video. His name was Kelechi, just 20 years old, a hustler surviving on the streets. He had seen injustice before, but never this blatant, never this bold. He replayed the clip quickly. The image was grainy, but clear enough. Daniel stealing from a beggar, mocking him, and strutting away. His heart raced. Should he post it? Could he? From across the street, Daniel glanced around, his golden shoes flashing as he climbed into a sleek black SUV. His friends piled in, their laughter muffled as the tinted windows rolled up. The car roared away, leaving Musa slumped on the ground, sobbing into his empty hands. Kelechi's jaw tightened. He looked at the screen again. He thought of his mother at home, struggling with rent. He thought of his younger sister, who had dropped out of school because there was no money for fees. And then he thought of Musa, too weak to even stand, robbed of the only hope he had. Kelechi lifted his phone, pressed upload, and whispered, "Let the world see." The video began to spread, quietly at first, like smoke under the door. But soon, it would blaze into a fire no palace walls could contain. The dust rose around Musa as he staggered to his feet, his knees weak but his voice trembling with resolve. He had nothing left but desperation. "Daniel!" he cried, though his voice cracked under the strain. His arms reached out as if trying to hold on to the young man's shadow. "Please, my son. That money, it is my eyes. My last hope. Without it, I will die in darkness." The SUV door was half open when Daniel paused, glancing back. The crowd held its breath. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a sliver of mercy in him. But Daniel only leaned casually against the doorframe, his sunglasses sliding down his nose to reveal eyes that glimmered with arrogance. "You will die in darkness either way, old man," he said coldly. "That's the world's order." His friends laughed, one of them shouting, "Preach it, Danny." Musa dropped to his knees in the middle of the street, raising his hands to the sky. "God, hear me. Let the world judge this boy." The SUV door slammed. The engine growled. Black smoke puffed from the exhaust as the car pulled away, leaving Musa coughing in the fumes. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, whispers racing from mouth to mouth. Some eyes filled with pity, others with anger, but none dared speak openly. Musa collapsed again onto his stool, his frail body trembling. For the first time in many years, his faith wavered. Across town, in a cramped one-room apartment lit by the glow of a single bulb, Kelechi sat cross-legged on his thin mattress, staring at his phone screen. The video had finished uploading. His hands shook as he refreshed the page. At first, nothing, 10 views, 20 views, a comment or two. But then the numbers began to leap. 100, 1,000, 10,000. The comments poured in. "Is this real? The president's son? I'm shaking with anger. Share this now. Justice for Musa." Kelechi pressed his palms together, whispering, "It's working." He switched between apps. On Twitter, hashtags began to spark. Hashtag Justice for Musa, hashtag Golden Shoes, hashtag President's Son. On Instagram, clips of the video spread like wildfire, influencers reposting with captions like, "This is what our leaders' children think of us." On TikTok, users added furious voiceovers, replaying the exact moment Daniel said, "Earn it like I did." By midnight, the video had reached 1 million views. And Musa, unaware of the storm, lay curled on his mat under the bridge, his empty hands clutching air where hope used to be. The presidential palace stood like a fortress on the hill, white marble, tall columns, and soldiers posted at every gate. Inside, the air was thick with polished silence. Daniel lounged on a velvet couch in the east wing, scrolling through his phone. His friends were gone. The laughter from earlier had died. He smirked as he watched the video of himself stealing from Musa. "Look at them," he muttered. "Millions of fools crying over a beggar. Do they think I care?" A butler approached quietly. "Sir, the First Lady wishes to see you." Daniel sighed, tossing his phone aside. "Of course she does." He entered the private sitting room where the First Lady, Grace, sat stiffly in an armchair. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen with unshed tears. "Daniel," she said softly, "tell me it isn't true." Daniel shrugged, pouring himself a drink. "If you're asking about the video, yes, it's true." "And what of it?" Grace's hand trembled as she clutched her rosary. "How could you humiliate a man like that? He is old enough to be your grandfather." Daniel laughed. "Mother, he's a beggar. Why waste your emotions on someone irrelevant?" Her voice broke. "Because dignity is never irrelevant." For the first time, Daniel faltered under her gaze. His mother's disappointment was a wound he had not expected. But pride kept his lips curled in a smirk. "Relax," he said. "Father will cover it up, as always." Grace closed her eyes, whispering a prayer. Deep down, she feared even her husband's power might not be enough this time. The city woke to chaos. By dawn, the streets buzzed with anger. Newspaper headlines screamed, "President's son humiliates beggar. Golden shoes, black heart. Hashtag justice for Musa," the video that shook the nation. At bus stops, commuters argued heatedly. In markets, women pointed at phone screens, clucking their tongues in disbelief. Taxi radios blared furious talk shows, callers demanding answers. By afternoon, hundreds gathered at Independence Avenue, the very spot where Musa had been robbed. They held cardboard signs scrawled with words. "We are all Musa. Dignity cannot be bought. Return the money." Some carried brooms, sweeping the streets in protest, chanting, "Sweep away corruption." Musa, bewildered by the sudden attention, was escorted to the front of the crowd by younger men. He stood trembling, his frail voice carried by megaphones. "I asked for mercy, and I was mocked," he said. "But today, I see I am not alone. Thank you." The crowd roared, fists raised high. Across the city, protests multiplied. Students marched on campuses, chanting Daniel's name like a curse. Churches and mosques rang with sermons about justice. And online, the fury knew no borders. Celebrities retweeted the video. Activists demanded sanctions. International news networks replayed the clip with subtitles. The nation was no longer just angry. It was united. That evening, the palace dining hall was heavy with tension. The long table, usually filled with chatter, was silent except for the clinking of cutlery. The president sat at the head, his face a mask of stone. Daniel sat to his left, still defiant, scrolling his phone even as servants placed dishes before him. Finally, Grace broke the silence. "Look at me, Daniel." He ignored her. "Daniel, look at me." He sighed and raised his eyes, and froze. Her eyes were red, swollen from hours of weeping. The pain in them cut deeper than any headline or protest chant. "You are my son," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But tonight, when I watched that video, I saw a stranger. A stranger with my child's face." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Mother." "No," her voice grew firmer. "Do not call me mother until you remember what it means to be human." The words silenced even the president. Daniel's phone slipped slightly from his grip. For the first time, beneath the arrogance, a crack appeared, a shadow of doubt, of fear, of shame. But it was too late. Outside the palace gates, the chants of thousands shook the walls. The people demanded justice, and the mother's tears were only the beginning. The presidential office, usually a sanctuary of polished calm, was now a war room. Stacks of newspapers lay scattered across the president's mahogany desk. Every headline screamed the same story: his son, his shame. President Adewale rubbed his temples as ministers filled the room with clashing voices. "Sir, we must deny everything, say it's fabricated," barked the Minister of Information. "No," countered the Attorney General. "The video is too clear. If we deny, we look foolish. The people will not forgive a lie." "Then silence the press," another suggested. The president slammed his hand on the desk. The room fell silent. He turned slowly toward the wide window overlooking the city. Even here, at the highest tower, the chants from the streets drifted up, "Justice for Musa!" He closed his eyes. He had spent decades building his name, crafting an image of incorruptibility. But all it had taken was a moment of arrogance from his son to unravel it. "Leave me," he said quietly. The ministers exchanged nervous glances but obeyed, shuffling out one by one. Alone, the president sat in his leather chair, staring at the portrait of his younger self on the wall. Idealistic, determined, a man who once believed he could change a nation. Now, the same nation stood outside his gates with fire in their voices. Did he protect his only son? Or did he protect the country that had trusted him? The dilemma gnawed at his soul. By the next morning, the scandal had spilled far beyond national borders. CNN replayed the video under the banner, "President's son humiliates beggar, outrage in capital city." BBC anchors called it a symbol of elite cruelty. Al Jazeera ran the clip alongside footage of the protests. On Twitter, celebrities added their fury. "I stand with Musa. Dignity cannot be stolen." An Oscar-winning actor. "If this happened in my country, we would shut down the palace until justice was served." A famous activist. Even world leaders spoke cautiously. The prime minister of a neighboring country remarked during a press conference, "Leadership is not inherited, it is earned. Children of leaders must remember that." Tourism boards began to panic, fearing boycotts. Foreign investors pulled back deals. The currency dipped. All because of a cup of money stolen in broad daylight. Meanwhile, Musa had become a reluctant symbol. Journalists swarmed him outside the old church where he had taken shelter. His frail frame, his tired eyes, and his trembling voice appeared on screens across the globe. "I am no hero," he said softly into the microphones. "I am only a man who asked for mercy." But those words, humble as they were, spread like fire. They were replayed, quoted, painted on banners, turned into songs. Musa's voice had become the conscience of a wounded nation. Inside the palace, a late-night meeting unfolded. The president sat at the head of the long table, his ministers on either side. The air was thick with tension. One minister whispered urgently, "Sir, the army grows restless. If the people do not calm, there could be violence." Another added, "Foreign allies are threatening sanctions. We cannot ignore this." The president drummed his fingers on the table. He looked at Daniel, sitting with arms crossed, jaw set in defiance. "Daniel," he said finally, "do you understand what you have done?" Daniel scoffed. "Father, you're overreacting. It was a beggar. A nobody. These people outside, they will forget. They always do." The president's voice thundered, "Enough!" Even Daniel flinched. "You are my son, but you are not above the law," the president continued, his voice shaking with fury. "You have shamed me. You have shamed your mother. And you have shamed this nation." The room froze. One advisor leaned in. "Sir, the people will not be satisfied until there is accountability. A public apology, at the very least." The president closed his eyes. He hated the thought, but he knew it was true. He turned to Daniel. "Tomorrow, you will face the press. You will apologize to Musa, and to the nation." Daniel's lips curled into a bitter smile. "If that's what you want, father." But deep inside, he had no intention of humbling himself. The following morning, Musa was invited to speak at a university auditorium filled with students, activists, and journalists. He shuffled to the stage slowly, leaning on a borrowed cane. The crowd rose in thunderous applause, chanting his name, "Musa! Musa!" He raised his hand gently for silence. "I never asked to be here," he began, his voice thin but steady. "I am just a man who begged for coins on the street. But when that young man took my savings, he did not only steal money. He stole dignity. He stole hope." The hall was silent, every ear straining to hear. "But today, I see something greater," Musa continued, his eyes moist. "I see that dignity is not mine alone. It belongs to all of us. When he mocked me, he mocked every poor man, every widow, every child without food. And when you raise your voices for me, you raise them for all who cannot speak." The audience erupted in cheers, some wiping tears from their eyes. "Remember this," Musa said, gripping the podium. "Power does not last forever. But justice, it endures. And today, I ask only for justice." The speech spread faster than the video itself. On every news channel, on every feed, Musa's words were hailed as prophetic. The beggar had become the moral compass of a nation. That evening, cameras crowded into the presidential press hall. Flashbulbs flickered, microphones bristled. Daniel walked in wearing a tailored suit, flanked by security. His face was expressionless, his posture stiff. The president and first lady sat grimly in the front row. Musa, frail but resolute, sat among the journalists. His presence electrified the room. Daniel approached the podium, glancing briefly at the cameras. His jaw tightened. "I stand before you today," he paused, his eyes narrowing, "to apologize for my actions." There was no warmth in his voice, no sincerity. The words were flat, rehearsed, hollow. "To the man Musa," he continued, barely glancing at him, "and to the people of this country, I regret what happened. It was a mistake, and I have learned my lesson." The hall was silent, the tension palpable. Then Daniel added, with the faintest smirk, "I hope this little drama can finally end, so we can all move on." Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras clicked furiously. Musa bowed his head, grief heavy in his chest. The First Lady covered her face with trembling hands. Outside, crowds watching the broadcast on giant screens erupted in fury. Chants of "shame, shame," filled the air. And then, as if fate itself wanted to deepen the wound, a new leak spread online, an audio recording of Daniel mocking the apology before the press conference. "Ha! I'll tell them what they want to hear," his recorded voice sneered. "Then I'll go home and drink to it. Beggars deserve nothing." The nation exploded. The night cracked open like a drum. From the palace balcony, Daniel watched the city he'd always treated as a toy swell with bodies and voices. The avenue below was a river of people, their chants steady as thunder, "Justice for Musa! Justice for Musa!" Each wave of sound climbed the marble pillars and rattled the crystal in the chandeliers. Riot police stood like statues in helmets and black shields, their faces invisible. His phone would not stop buzzing. Messages from friends trying to be brave in private. "Bro, lie low. Delete your accounts. I can get you out of the city in an hour." He ignored them, staring at the ants of humanity below. He had never seen the poor take up so much space. Behind him, the French doors creaked. Grace entered without a sound. She wore a simple wrapper and scarf, no makeup, her eyes swollen from days of prayer and insomnia. She came to the balcony and stood beside him, palms wrapped around themselves as if she were holding a breakable truth. "Listen," she said. Daniel tried not to. The chant pressed against him anyway, a tide that would not recede. "Your father is in crisis," she whispered. "The cabinet cannot agree, the markets are falling, the embassies are calling." A tremor slid through her voice. "And my son, has turned our home into a fortress against our own people." "I said I would apologize," he replied, staring stubbornly at the road. "I did it. What more do they want? Blood." Grace looked at him carefully, as if a surgeon searching for the pulse of conscience. "They want truth," she said. "They want humility. They want you to see that an old man's dignity weighs more than your shoes." He glanced down at the golden leather gleaming beneath him. For the first time, the polish looked cheap. A siren flashed at the far end of the street. Tear gas plumes blossomed white, the crowd coughed and scattered, then regrouped and roared again, louder, angrier, more human than before. Daniel's throat tightened. He imagined Musa somewhere in that sea of faces, Not as a symbol on a screen, but as a man who could still be trampled and hurt. A knock. The chief of staff stepped into the sitting room behind them, hands clasped, eyes avoiding Grace's. "Ma'am." "Sir." "The president asks for you in the study." He hesitated. "It's urgent." They passed gilt-framed portraits in a corridor suddenly too narrow. At the study door, Daniel felt his mother's fingers close on his sleeve. She had done that when he was a boy, when he'd run toward a road without looking. He shook her off gently, and instantly wished he hadn't. Inside, President Adewale stood by the desk. On the leather blotter, a stack of legal papers, a single fountain pen, a small wooden crucifix. The air was heavy with the smell of paper, decisions inked into history. The president's face was calm and terrible. "Sit." Daniel did not. Stubbornness felt safer than the chair. "You have endangered the country," the president said. He didn't raise his voice. The cold steadiness made the words cut deeper. "You have mocked the poor, shamed your mother, and tested your father. The law must be stronger than my love for you." Daniel swallowed. "Father, you will surrender yourself to the authorities in the morning." Silence took the room. The clock ticked once, loudly. Grace's breath caught. Her fingers found the crucifix on the desk and held it like a friend. Daniel felt something foreign creep up his spine. Fear, thin and cold. He tried to laugh and found he could not. "They'll eat me alive," he said softly. "Then go to them with bread," the president replied. "And learn how to share." A clatter outside, someone at the gates banging metal, a chant crashing into their walls. "No more princes! No more golden shoes!" Daniel stared at his father. "You would let them humiliate your son?" The president's eyes steadied on him. "I would let the law humble a citizen." It was the first time Daniel understood that being a son was not a shield, only a relationship. His tongue searched for a rebellion and found none. He looked down at the shoes again, as if they could speak for him. They were silent. Later, back in his room, he slammed the closet door open, pulled the golden shoes off and hurled them. They struck the mirror, a clean bright star exploding across the glass. For a heartbeat he watched his reflection split into fractured versions of himself. Boy, prince, thief, fool. He sank to the floor and did not deny it when his body shook. He had mistaken the world for a stage and people for props. The curtain was finally falling. Morning came gray and swollen with rain. The city smelled like metal and tumult. The protests had not slept, they had simply changed outfits. Daniel dressed without help. Plain shirt, dark trousers, old sneakers that felt like a confession. He went downstairs with no entourage, only the sound of his own soles daring the palace tiles to remember him. Grace waited near the entrance hall, rosary threaded through her fingers like a ladder she'd climbed all night. She reached up and straightened his collar. Then her hands cupped his face with a gentleness so absolute he could not hold his breath against it. "I will walk with you," she said. He nodded, grateful and unworthy at once. Outside, 3 police SUVs idled. Not the elite security convoy he was used to, just police, human, ordinary, armed with the public's authority. The lead officer stepped forward and did something no one had done to Daniel in public before. He looked into his eyes as if they were equal. "Sir," the officer said, voice respectful, posture firm. "For processing, please." Daniel lifted his wrists automatically. The officer hesitated, then shook his head. Not necessary at this stage. He stepped aside and opened the door. Grace exhaled a prayer. Daniel climbed in. At the front gates, the world opened into noise. Protesters parted like water around the convoy, but their voices poured in through the metal and glass. "No crown above the law. Justice for Musa." Someone stepped forward and flung a handful of fake dollar bills into the air. They wheeled like startled birds, stuck wet to the windshield, and slid away. In the back seat, Daniel pressed his forehead to the cool window and watched the city from a new angle. Not from balconies and VIP passes, but from behind a veil of consequence. They drove past Independence Avenue. The stool where Musa had sat was gone, but the memory of it was louder than the horns around him. The police station smelled of disinfectant and conversations. Papers shuffled. A metal fan struggled on a hook. Daniel was led through a narrow corridor. Heads turned, then quickly pretended not to. The booking process was clinical and humiliating in ways that were almost medicinal. He felt small. For the first time, small felt right. In the waiting area, a young journalist nearly dropped her pen as he passed. Daniel had the odd urge to apologize for existing. When he was finally led to a narrow room with a chair and a table, he discovered he was not alone. Musa sat there, a wool cap on his head despite the heat, a cane leaning against the table. Kelechi stood behind him, hands clasped, eyes bright with a calm that had no gloat in it, only a steady purpose. Daniel stopped in the doorway, breath catching against a tide of shame. "I did not ask to see him," Musa said to the officer, turning his face toward the sound. "But if the law wishes it, then let us be men." The officer left them. Daniel took the chair opposite. The table was scratched with years of stories that had not trended. He stared at Musa's hands, thin, rough, trembling faintly as they rested on the wood. "I stole from you," Daniel said, the words clumsy and enormous. "I stole more than money." Musa nodded once. His voice was almost gentle. "Why did you do it?" Daniel opened his mouth and found no defense. "Because I could," he admitted. "Because I believed the world was for me and not for you." "And now?" Musa asked. "I am learning how wrong a person can be and still keep breathing," Daniel said. He surprised himself by not dressing the sentence in wit. He let it stand in its nakedness. Kelechi shifted his weight, the phone in his pocket a quiet witness. "The court will decide," he said. "But truth has already begun its work." The door opened. The officer returned. "Time." He gestured lightly. As they stood, Musa steadied himself with the cane and faced where he sensed Daniel's breath. "You are your father's son," he said, "but that is not the only thing you can be." Those words trailed Daniel down the hall like a lantern he could not yet grasp. By the time the trial began, the city had learned to line up early for justice. People brought stools and newspapers and flasks of tea, as if the courthouse steps were a theater and the performance belonged to them. Vendors circulated with bottled water and groundnuts. Whispers moved faster than the ceiling fans. Inside, the courtroom's wooden benches groaned under the weight of history and bodies. The judge entered in black robes and white collar, a woman whose eyes had balanced many men before. Her gavel's first strike restored silence like a clean page. "The people versus Daniel Adewale," the clerk intoned, voice echoing. "Charges: theft, public humiliation, and incitement through reckless conduct leading to civil unrest." Daniel stood when told, the floor solid and unforgiving under his shoes. He did not look for his parents. He knew they were somewhere behind, in the anonymous safety of the spectators' rows, forced into the democracy of benches. He kept his eyes level, breathing in would polish and consequence. The prosecution began with the video. The screen flickered. The grainy footage was once again a window. There he was, smirk, snatch, sentence, earn it like I did. The room hissed softly, a collective intake of memory's cold air. The prosecutor called Kelechi. He took the oath with hands that had peeled plantains in heat and held history in a cracked phone. He described the day, the heat, the laughter like knives, the way the old man's hands reached not for a fight but for mercy. He identified Daniel without bravado, without malice. Facts were even more powerful than outrage. The defense rose with polished cufflinks and a surgeon's smile. "Mr. Kelechi," the lawyer began, "is it true you profit from views on your page?" Kelechi's brow furrowed. "I profit from roasted plantains," he said simply. A ripple of laughter, quickly scolded by the judge's gavel. The defense pivoted. The video could be manipulated. Shadows, edits. A forensic expert later testified, the clip was intact, unaltered. Reality had resisted even the cleverest spin. Then Musa. He walked slowly to the witness stand, cane beating a soft metronome against the tile. Someone in the back row began to stand in respect. The room followed until 100 bodies rose at once for an old man's small journey. The judge did not stop them. Some ceremonies are older than courts. Musa took the oath, voice steady. "I am a man," he said, "with many years and little money. That day, I held in a cup what I had scraped from life with my palms. When the young man took it, I felt not only poor but erased." He paused. "Yet I ask for no one to be erased in return." The prosecutor nodded softly. "Can you tell the court what the money was for?" "My eyes," Musa answered. He tapped his temple gently. The world had begun to fade at the edges. "I wanted to see faces clearly, just a bit longer." The defense tried tenderness that rang like hollow silver. "Sir, there are funds for the poor. Why not apply?" Musa's smile was a fragile bridge that held anyway. "Because the poor often need paper to prove they are poor. And someone to sign the paper. And someone to see the person who brings the paper. It is a long walk in darkness." Silence spread over the room like shade after hard sunlight. Finally, the judge called Daniel. He stepped into the witness box with a heart that had stopped performing. The oath felt like a stone he had to hold in his mouth. The prosecutor's questions were clean knives. "Mr. Adewale, do you deny taking the money?" "No," he said. The word tasted like iron. "Do you deny saying, 'Earn it like I did'?" "No." "What did you mean by it?" "That I believed my comfort was merit, and his hardship was a flaw," he answered. The room seemed to lean forward. "I believed wrong. Do you understand the consequences your actions helped produce?" "Yes." "What are they?" He looked out across the wood and faces and law. "I harmed a man who had done me no harm. I inflamed a country already tired. I made a mockery of mercy. I tore something in my mother's eyes I don't know if I can mend." The defense tried to reframe, to shrink the sin until it fit some technical pocket. But the judge's gaze refused smallness. She recessed for judgment, and the city waited the way a body waits after a deep breath. Outside during the recess, clouds stacked in the sky. A girl no older than 10 balanced a sign almost as tall as she was, "Dignity is a right." She offered Kelechi a bottle of water with a grin missing 2 teeth. He took it, and for once did not raise his phone. When the judge returned, the room steadied itself. The gavel dropped once. "Stand." Daniel stood. He felt the moment enter his bones like weather. "This court finds you guilty of theft and of aggravated public humiliation," the judge said, voice clear, syllables like measured steps. "You are also responsible for reckless conduct that contributed to unrest. But justice must be more than punishment, it must be repair." A murmur. The judge continued. "You will serve 12 months in custody," she said, and Daniel's stomach fell. "However, this term will be suspended provided you complete the following within the same 12 months under this court's supervision. 1. You will perform 1,000 hours of community labor, not in a private facility, not behind palace gates, but among the people whose dignity you mocked. The court assigns Mr. Musa the right to supervise your labor's completion and to report to this bench without interference. 2. You will pay restitution of $1,000 to Mr. Musa immediately, and you will fund 100 additional eye surgeries through a public hospital foundation. The shoes you wore during the incident," she glanced, almost imperceptibly, at the case officer holding a sealed bag marked Exhibit C, "will be auctioned, with proceeds dedicated to the same cause. Let vanity purchase sight." A low hum of surprise, then an exhale from somewhere that might have been a sob or a laugh. The judge's gaze gathered them again. 3. You will live on a civil service wage for the duration, transparent, audited. You will learn the arithmetic of a life without excess. She leaned slightly forward. Disobedience to any part will activate the custodial sentence, without appeal. Her eyes softened without losing their steel. "Mr. Musa," she said, turning, "this court thanks you for your courage. The law is often blind. Today, you lend it your cane." Musa bowed his head. "May it walk straighter," he murmured. The gavel fell. The room released a breath it had been holding for weeks. Outside, thunder spoke across the sky, then rain began, generous, washing dust from faces, making the courthouse steps shine like new wood. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. Daniel moved through it quiet as a penitent. The golden shoes, now evidence in a plastic bag, swung from an officer's hand like an absurd moral. Kelechi found him briefly at the foot of the stairs. "I'll cover the service," he said. "Not to shame you again. To show work." Daniel nodded. "Then show me working," he said, and surprised himself by meaning it. He turned to find Musa at his side, the rain ticking softly on the old man's wool cap. "When do we start?" Daniel asked. Musa smiled as if the question had waited all his life. "Tomorrow," he said. "At dawn. The gutters are full of last night's anger." Dawn came pink and honest. The city wore the rain like a clean sheet. Under Independence Bridge, a man who had once taken filmed, and a man who had once filmed worked. They started with brooms, cheap plastic ones that bit the palms, and moved to shovels. The gutter along the avenue choked with black water and city secrets, plastic bags, bottle caps, a lost heel, a poster with a politician's grin peeling from it like a scab. Every scoop was heavier than Daniel expected, and lighter than he deserved. People slowed as they passed. Some pointed, some jeered softly, some simply watched with a guarded curiosity. A few, mostly women with wrappers tied high for work, stopped to hold a trash bag open while he dumped a shovel's worth inside. A man in a faded jersey clapped once after an hour and said, "Better sweat than perfume, Oga." By mid-morning, mud painted Daniel's trousers. The sneakers were no longer a confession, they were an instrument. His breath burned pleasantly. The rhythm of work became a prayer made of muscles and small choices. Musa supervised like a foreman of souls. He didn't shout. He walked the line slowly, cane tapping, pointing to what eyes missed. There. That corner. Lift from the knees. He stopped to rest on a low wall, and when Daniel brought him water, he took it like a teacher accepting a late homework that might still be worth something. On day 3, schoolboys lined the curb and chanted with mischief, "Community boy." It stung, then dulled, then became a drumbeat in Daniel's chest. He waved back, and the smallest one waved shyly in return. On day 5, a woman who sold akara at the corner wrapped 4 in newspaper and thrust them into his hands without charge. "Eat," she said. "Work needs oil." On day 8, they moved to repaint crosswalks outside a crowded market. A taxi driver yelled, "Make it bold for us, a beg," and Daniel bent lower with a brush as if someone's life might depend on the angle of white paint. Kalechi filmed some of it and posted less than half. The rest he kept, a quiet archive of hands learning to be useful. What he did share was not scandal now. It was sweat, laughter, small talk over shared bottles of water, Musa tapping a beat on the curb while a boy hummed a tune. One afternoon, as the sun loosened and the city began to taste like mango and diesel, a hospital administrator found them by the roundabout. "Mr. Adewale," she said, tentative but clear. "The surgeries are scheduled. The first 10 tomorrow. Mr. Musa," she turned, and her voice softened. "You're first on the list." There was a stillness then, as if the street itself took a pause to listen to a man's future open. The next morning, the ward smelled of antiseptic and hope. Daniel sat in a plastic chair beside Musa's bed while nurses moved like gentle birds. A surgeon with kind eyes explained the procedure again. Musa nodded calmly, hands folded, as if he had been built for trust. Grace slipped into the room carrying a small thermos of pepper soup. She had become a regular at the work sites too, bringing bananas, offering shade, calling men "my sons," until they stood straighter. She set the thermos on the bedside table and took Musa's hand. "Pray for me too," she whispered. He smiled. "We will see together," he said. The surgery did not take long, but time went liquid for those who waited. Daniel paced the corridor, palms slick, heart auditioning fear and hope in alternating roles. He stared at a poster about hand-washing and realized how arrogant his fingers had been all his life. When the doctor emerged, the smile was a sunrise. "It went well," she said. They moved Musa to recovery. Bandages wrapped his eyes like a gift the city had bought him. "Tomorrow," the nurse said, "we'll remove them." Musa nodded, the rhythm of the cane replaced now by the slow drum of a healing heart. Word spread. By the time the bandages were due to come off, the waiting room had more people than chairs. Market women, taxi drivers, students, a church choir leader, a girl with a dignity is a right sign, even the taxi driver who wanted the crosswalks bold. The president arrived quietly, no motorcade, just a man with lines on his face and his hat in his hands. He held Grace's fingers like he'd found the edge of a cliff. Inside, a nurse turned to Daniel. "Help him sit." Daniel swallowed and slid an arm behind Musa's shoulders. The old man's bones felt like a book he was finally strong enough to hold. The nurse's fingers were deft, unwrapping the gauze layer by layer until the last ribbon of white hung loose like a last lie. "Open," she said gently. Musa blinked. His eyelids fluttered, then steadied. The room blurred into color, then sharpened. He saw the nurse's smile first, ordinary miracle. He saw the window, the square of daylight like a promise kept. He saw the steaming thermos, the small crucifix on the wall, the chair where anxiety had sat. He turned his face gradually, carefully, as if each degree might break something fragile, and found Daniel. For a second, neither moved. The moment was a bridge built of all the days between the street and this room. "I see you," Musa said at last, voice trembling like a praise song. Daniel's mouth trembled. He held Musa's hand with a gentleness he had not known he possessed. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words finally the right size. Musa nodded. "Then do not stop being sorry until it turns into something useful," he said. "Make your apology into roads, into clean water, into hands that lift." Daniel laughed wetly, an unpracticed sound. "Yes, sir." Outside, when they stepped into the corridor, the waiting room erupted. Someone shouted, "Baba can see." Someone else yelled, "Sing." The little girl with the sign started a chorus. The churchwoman grabbed a hand drum. Kelechi lifted his camera and then lowered it again, letting the singing soak into memory unmediated. The weeks that followed stitched themselves into a new story. The surgeries happened, 10 and 10 and 10, cataracts and scars peeled away in quietly spectacular rooms. Photographs hung in the hospital lobby of eyes before and eyes after, clouded, then clear. Under each, a first name, a year, a small note that said funded by restitution. The golden shoes were auctioned for an absurd price. The buyer sent them to a museum exhibit on ego. The placard read, "A mistake that paid for sight." Daniel kept working long after the hour counter crossed 1,000. He learned to plan a drainage route so rainwater would not drown a street. He learned the names of 5 stray dogs who adopted their crew. He learned that sometimes dignity is as simple as asking, "May I?" and waiting for the answer. The civil service stipend arrived each month like a silent teacher in envelopes that did not care about his pedigree. He visited schools and spoke without microphones about how quickly pride can blind. He stood in church basements and community halls and market sheds, never as a guest of honor, always as a cautionary tale who was trying to become a neighbor. Sometimes a heckler tried to sting him back into performance. He let them. Sometimes people forgave him one sentence at a time. He accepted that too. Forgiveness, he learned, is labor on both sides of the handshake. On a humid afternoon near the year's end, the President and Grace walked the avenue with no motorcade, just 2 people among many. They found Daniel and Musa finishing a mural under the bridge. Bold strokes of a cup transforming into a sunrise, a hand lowering coins turning into a hand lifting a child across a flooded curb. The words beneath were Musa's, in letters a boy from the choirs had painted carefully. Money can be counted. Dignity cannot. The President stood a long time, hat in hands. Then he turned to Musa. "Sir," he said, polishing each syllable with humility, "thank you for supervising my son." Musa leaned on his cane and smiled, the lines around his eyes new and beautiful. "He supervised himself," he replied. "I only rang the bell for class." People gathered as people always do around color and truth. Kelechi finally raised his camera. This time he filmed slowly, the brush dipping, Musa tapping the beat on the curb, the President holding a paint tray like it was a policy, Grace laughing when a drop landed on her wrapper and calling it a badge. The clip would go online later with no caption. It would be shared millions of times without arguments in the comments, just little lines of text like, "I cried at this one. This is the country I want. Look at Musa's smile." At sunset, when the last light wove itself into the river, Daniel sat beside Musa on the low wall. The air smelled like paint and fried plantain. Traffic hummed without honking, the rarest miracle of all. "What you said in court," Daniel murmured, watching a flock of egrets fold into a tree. "That you ask for no one to be erased. I think I understand that now." Musa nodded. "If you erase a man, you erase his chance to change." They sat in companionable quiet. Then Musa added, mischief creeping into his tone, "Tomorrow we start on the public toilets by the motor park. Hard work. Smell of sin and stew." Daniel groaned, laughing. "Sir, show mercy." Musa grinned. "Mercy is a mop." They rose together. The city exhaled. The moon arrived like a coin no one would ever steal. And somewhere in a museum, behind glass, a pair of golden shoes stood very still, proof that you can turn arrogance into eyesight, and cruelty into a sentence that reads better the longer you live it. The end.